I'm Morgan, and today I'm going to give my thoughts on the movie Zombieland. I watched this movie with my significant other. He was the one who suggested it. I never ever would have picked out this movie to watch of my own accord, but we were really struggling to find a movie that both of us would agree upon to watch. And so when he suggested Zombieland, which is at least at the time of recording available on Netflix in my geographic location, I was like, okay, fine, we'll watch this. I never would ever choose to watch a zombie movie of my own accord. My worst fear as a child were zombies. Zombies are just utterly terrifying to me because they represent, like, they are a representation of so many horrifying little individual fears, because not only are they like reanimated corpses, so they represent like death and almost like a disgust for like decay and stuff too, but also they represent almost like loss of free will, loss of autonomy, loss of feeling, and all these things that make us human, because zombies, like, they'll attack people who used to be their friends, who used to be their family. They've lost control of themselves. So I think that zombies are like just a representation or a personification of some of my deepest fears. And they also like prey on this, I guess I describe it as like an instinctive fear of like predators, like in the same way that I'd be afraid of like a wolf or a bear or something, or I guess like a puma or a mountain lion like stalking me. I'd be afraid of like zombies hiding. Like they kind of just remind me of like predators in some way, like, because they're like, they typically like attack or jump out at people from like places where you wouldn't expect them to be. So I don't know, zombies are just utterly terrifying to me. So I was not expecting to like this movie. And like, I thought it was really interesting because it's meant to be like a comedy. It's definitely not a traditional, like, what I would expect a zombie movie to be. Like, I expect zombie movies to be like horror, like meant to be scaring people, but this was instead meant to be almost funny or humorous. I actually thought it was a really incredibly creative piece of writing. I think it was really good writing. The writing was, I guess I would describe it as like campy at times, but in a way that I think was good. Kind of like, in some ways it reminded me of Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and I think part of that is the protagonist, basically. The protagonist just reminds me a lot of Scott in Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Like, he's very kind of like socially awkward and almost like nerdy and kind of introverted. And I thought it was really cool to see a character like that be the protagonist in a zombie apocalypse. And I just thought it was really unconventional, but in a way where it's like the writing worked. It made sense that a character like that would survive, because if he's socially awkward and barely leaves his house, then he's not likely to be around a lot of people when a zombie apocalypse would be theoretically starting out. And so he's not likely to be bit initially, and he's used, I'd say almost used to operating on his own, so he might not be dealing with the social isolation aspect as much, like as hard as some other people might. And he seems to be a very organized sort of person. Like, he has that list of all these things that he does to survive, and he seems to be very smart, very logical, and like, how do I put this, to an extent I think that I don't know, he just seems like someone who would be good at making sure he has everything he needs to survive, who would be careful, very, very careful and cautious, so that way he wouldn't get, like, even if he got wounded in a way that wasn't like zombie related, like he might have first aid to treat it or whatever. Like, he just seems like the sort of person who would be prepared enough to survive for a long time in that sort of scenario, which is very weird to think about, because it's like, he's not like what I would stereotypically imagine as the sort of person who would be strong and successful at surviving on the road, but he manages to survive really well. So I thought that the writing for that character was very, creative and good. I really liked the writing. I think it worked well, like, within the realms of that universe. Like, I think the writing was excellent for his character. And I liked the way that the actor portrayed him. I don't know. I felt like I related a lot to the character, but I think it's, like, I feel like some of his traits are ones that I relate to as a neurodiverse person, but I'm not entirely sure if he's meant to be neurodiverse or if he's meant to just be, like, nerdy or whatever. But I felt like a lot of his quirks or quirkiness just reminded me of myself, because I feel like I'm a very overly cautious person, where it's like I want to know, like, I want to be, like, well-read or researched on something before I decide to make a decision about it, that sort of thing. Like, I feel like in a lot of ways, like, I have an overly cautious personality in the same way that the protagonist does, so I really liked him. I found him really relatable. I thought the other characters in the movie were, okay. Basically okay. Like, I really liked the other man character, because it's like, okay, I think that he did a good job of acting. I think the writing for him was pretty good. I loved the twist with the, like, with his son, like, that, when I realized, and when the main character realized that it was his son who had been lost, that it was, I believe Buck was his son, to me, like, that just really humanized this character who had otherwise been a little bit rough around their edges. Like, it really made him much more three-dimensional, and, like, I liked him. I felt like he was a little bit, I don't know, definitely there were times when it's like, okay, maybe his character is written a little bit for comedic effect or whatever, but it's like, I think his absolute obsession with Twinkies was a little bit, like, it felt like written for comedic effect, but at the same time, I think he was a pretty well-rounded character. Like, I thought he was a good character. Like, not, like, necessarily a likable person, but a good character. And so, yeah, I liked him. I had some issues with the female characters, because the first scene where they're introduced in the back of the grocery store, I didn't think that that was a risk that they would necessarily be willing to take, because when we realize that theoretically the younger sister has theoretically been bitten, even though we know later on that she wasn't, there is a decent chance that someone in that situation would just shoot her right away or kill her right away. So I think that that sort of ambush that happened is one where I'm like, I don't necessarily know if that's believable writing. Like, is that a risk that those characters would think is smart to take or not? Because they run the risk in a strategy like that of the younger sister just dying. And that's almost like, I assume, in my mind at least, like, if I were confronted with that situation, I wouldn't want to take that risk. Like, I wouldn't want to take that risk, because like, depending on the sort of person who stumbles upon you, they might just shoot first and ask questions later. And so we could have ended up with a very different movie if the younger sister had died early on. So, like, I don't really necessarily know if I like the way that they were introduced. I don't necessarily know if their characters were the most consistent. Just because, like, I don't know, I think that they'd be a little bit more, in some ways, like, I don't know, it's just like the thinking these things through, they're taking a huge amount of risks. So I'm also kind of wondering, like, if a character manages to survive that long, they probably wouldn't be taking that many risks in that sort of world. I don't know, I think there were parts of the movie that were definitely funny. I liked the character, like, the cameo of that one actor dude in Beverly Hills. That was kind of cool. I loved how they brought up this idea of, like, if you blend in with the zombies, they won't attack you, because I remember stumbling upon that idea in some Neopian adventure generator, like, adventure many years ago that someone came up with, of, like, where they used it in their little adventure, their little, like, choose your own adventure story. And so, like, I really thought it was so cool to see that same concept be brought up in a movie. I don't know who came up with it first, because that was years ago that I first, like, heard of that concept, but I thought it was really cool. Like, I thought that was cool. And the Bob, or whatever his name was, dying made sense because, again, I would assume that someone would shoot first and ask questions later in that sort of apocalypse situation. And so it's like, yeah, it makes sense that he got killed off there because he did something that is utterly foolish. But again, I'm very surprised that the younger sister didn't have that same thing happen to her when she pretended to be zombified or bitten. So yeah, I think in some ways it was funny. I don't know, I feel like it kind of encouraged destruction of property. So, like, I don't know, I didn't really like when they smashed up the entirely, like, that, how do I put this? Like, there was some store that they completely just, like, destroyed, and it's like, I don't know, I don't really like how, like, pro-vandalism the movie was at times. Like, I don't necessarily think that destroying things is always the healthiest way to deal with anger. But I get that in the post-apocalypse you probably don't have, like, many good methods of dealing with trauma, so, I don't know. The whole amusement park thing, it's like, I love how they went with this idea that sound attracts zombies, and, like, it was interesting to see that play out in universe, not only with, like, turning on all the amusement park things attracted all the zombies, but then the other guy was using the air horn to attract the zombies, so that was kind of cool. Like, I think that like, they did a good job of consistency within universe, is what I'm trying to say. I don't know, there were definitely times when it was intense and I was like, oh my gosh, I think she's gonna get bitten, she's gonna get bitten. So it definitely felt a little bit intense. At times, like, it did have stakes, it did have suspense. I didn't really feel like any of the characters had, like, how do I put this? I don't feel like any of the characters really had, like, plot armor to the point where I didn't believe that anything bad could happen to them. So, like, the main character, it's like, I assumed he wouldn't die because he's so cautious, but the girls and the other man, I was like, there were times where I was like, oh my gosh, are they gonna get bitten? But it felt like they were written in such a way where there were actually stakes, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I think it had good suspense. I think it was a very excellent combination of two, like, entirely different genres of, like, zombies, which are traditionally horror movies, and, like, just a campy comedy film. So I think it was a really good, like, good mashup. Like, I think it was good. I don't think I would watch it again, like, a second time, because it's like, again, I don't really like zombies. I find them terrifying. I can play Phasmophobia, like, I can deal with ghosts, but I don't do well with zombies, so I would not choose to watch this a second time for that reason. But I think the writing was actually pretty decent. Like, how do I put this? It was very good writing for, like, a one-time watch, but I feel like it's one of those movies where it's like, I just wouldn't necessarily go back and rewatch it. And the actors, I think, did a good job. I like, how do I put this? I liked the acting that the younger girl character did too, because I don't know, it's like, I feel like oftentimes for younger actors it can be very, like, acting is strenuous. If you're acting for long periods of time, it's strenuous. It can be hard to stay in character for long periods of time. And so, like, I think she did an excellent job for someone who is theoretically, like, probably, like, younger, so it would be a harder work experience for someone who was younger than someone who was older. And I think she did an excellent job as her role. I think all the actors really did a good job. I do think that the special effects with, like, the blood and the gore were, like, not necessarily for the faint of heart or easily squeamish, because there were weird times where I was like, ugh, but it is what it is. I think that is to be expected from a zombie movie. And it's not as bad as something like Kill Bill. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Zombieland. Thank you for listening to me give this kind of, like, my thoughts on critique type video, and I hope y'all are having a very happy day. Bye!